So our topic today is second line of defense, which is still part of the innate immune system, but it's not barriers now. So if pathogens get past the barriers, whether they're physical, like skin and membranes, hairs, or chemical, which are found at those body surfaces and body entries, if pathogens get past that, they won't encounter second line of defense. But it's still innate. You still have these things basically from birth. And there are basically four different categories of second line of defense. And I want you to write on this page something under here. Some subcategories of the antimicrobial proteins. And these are, number one, something called complement. Number two, something called interferons. And number three, AMPs, which is antimicrobial proteins, but this is a catch-all. There are specific ones called complement and interferon that are important to know on their own qualities. So together, those are specific proteins that help you fight microbes. And then we have fever, which is a process, inflammation, which is a process, and phagocytosis, which is a process. So these are all processes. This group is specific proteins, which are not really chemicals, they're proteins. They fall into second line of defense. And I used to have these, at some point I reordered these, and I used to talk about phagocytic cells second, but now I talk about them first. So the number 2 here, it's still one of those four second line of defense things. I'm just talking about it in a different order. So what this is a false colored scanning electron micrograph, and everything in the white lavender stuff here, this is a phagocytic cell. These are rod-shaped bacteria, and what this looks like is there's a cell like crawling itself around these bacteria, and it's in the process of engulfing them. It's going to eat them, and it's going to destroy them. And this process is called phagocytosis. Or some people would pronounce it phagocytosis, and they're both pronunciations are okay. So phagocytic cells, the main ones that you have are macrophages. And macrophages roam around the body looking for invaders, and when they find them, they will engulf them and destroy them. So macrophages are one set of those. I know you can't see this, like the words on this, but this is your blood cell lineage. So every blood cell in your body comes from stem cells in the bone marrow. And this is an AMP2 topic actually, but you have these stem cells in your bone marrow. Some of them will divide and become red blood cells, platelets. Some of them divide and produce all the different white blood cells. I want to circle down in here this one. So the macrophage, that's the one I was just talking about and that I wrote over there. And this one called dendritic cells. So macrophages are general roamers, like they roam around the body and they travel in the bloodstream, and they go long distances to look for problems. You also have in tissues a set of similar cells, they're called dendritic. Dendritic cells. And these kind of act like macrophages, but they're found in tissues. So you have some of them in your skin. Remember down in the lower levels of your skin, you have cells that are, like they have all these extensions and they look like spidery. those are waiting in the skin for anything that gets past your top layer as a second line of defense. You also have some of these in your nervous system as well. So they're kind of have a similar function. They're trying to identify who's made it past the barriers, engulf it, digest it, destroy it altogether, to do phagocytosis. This generally shows how they do that. So here's your white blood cell. It's a macrophage. And when you are young, when you're at a younger age, or in childhood, your macrophages are supposed to learn what are your self molecules. They're supposed to learn, oh, well, this thing is actually part of my body, so I should leave it alone and not destroy it, because that would be harmful. So at a younger age, these cells will learn what is self. Learn what is self. Once you learn what is self, anything that is not self, so after that, anything that is not self will be considered a danger. So you can kind of think of this as like if you bring raising little kids, we talk about them, oh, they're too sheltered. Too sheltered, and everything is scary to them. Well, what you encounter when you're young is what you're used to, and then everything else that you haven't seen is scary. Kind of a similar concept. So after that learning process, anything that's not self can be detected, like, oh, you are a danger, engulfed, destroyed, basically by
dissolving the components inside the cell. And that's what macrophages do.
Both macrophages and dendritic cells, they're both phagocytic.
Yeah.
Phagocytic.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Are macrophages always called macrophages? I thought I read that like they're called something different whenever they go to certain areas.
Kind of like the ones that live in certain areas, they are called specific names.
Okay.
Macrophages, like just plain macrophages, like these, they roam around the whole body and they can go into accessible areas.
Okay.
They can go into accessible areas where they don't have to crawl through tissue.
Okay.
So places where you have tissues.
That's where dendritic cells.
Yeah. It's kind of like dendritic cells develop with those tissues because they've got a lot of layers, like in the skin or in the nervous system where you're not supposed to be able to just crawl to that spot.
Okay.
Or another one is the lungs. Like, you do have specific types of macrophages that live in the lungs and they wait in there, in the alveoli for problems. Or in the skin, these Langerhans dendritic cells that you learn about in skin, they're kind of stuck there. Like they're not going to leave the skin and go over to the muscles or anything like that. They're here. That's where they're going to be the whole time. They don't roam through the bloodstream. Did we write that? Let's write that. Macrophages, general roaming through bloodstream and lymph. So a lot of times I compare immune cells to police. So police that drive around in cars looking for trouble, that's like macrophages. If you're gonna like embed like an undercover person, like would you please go over there and just stay there all the time and become like one of the criminals? That would be more like a dendritic cell. They're going to stay in that spot and not just be roaming around looking for general problems. So dendritic cells are going to stay in a spot, and that's their area, and they're going to look for invaders. But the general macrophages, they are going to go all through the bloodstream, pumped by the circulatory system, and they also are found in the lymphatic system. So they use blood and lymph as highways, so to speak.
These are the macrophages.
Yeah, the general macrophages to monitor body fluids. So when most of you get to AMP2, we talk about how does the circulatory system work in detail, how does the lymphatic system work in detail, but both of these are moving fluids around the body, moving white blood cells around the body, and that's a good way to look for pathogens in multiple spots. So just roam, look for foreign invaders. When you find them, destroy them, eat them. This slide is a little bit out of order. I'll come back to that in a minute. I guess it's not really out of order, but so this slide doesn't go with macrophages. These aren't macrophages. These are another kind of white blood cells that are involved in inflammation. So right up here, this slide is the start of talking about inflammation. So macrophages, I'm going to go back to this blood cell lineage. Okay, so every cell in this box over here, these are white blood cells, and these have something to do with the immune system. These two do phagocytosis. The next set that we're going to talk about is a set called neutrophils, and they have a different function that's more related to inflammation. And generally, what happens during inflammation, during inflammation, we have neutrophils, which are a type of white blood cell involved in the immune system, leave the blood where they've been roaming with the macrophages. They leave the blood and they enter a body tissue with an attempted infection. So this type of stuff would be going on during in between exposure and attachment. There are a lot of fights going on in your body between the invaders and your immune system. And depending on like when the fight occurs, it might be before an infection is ever established. Yeah.
When you say attempted infection, is that like the infection pathogen itself trying to infect the host?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this picture is really about how do the neutrophils get out of the bloodstream. They're normally floating through the bloodstream, circulating, monitoring. This is about how they get out of the bloodstream. They wouldn't go out of the bloodstream unless they have a reason to do so. So now we're going to talk about why would they do that and what signals them to do that. So the example that this book and a lot of other books use is someone gets punctured with a nail. So many A&P and micro books like, well, you get punctured with this nail and it's got, or you could say that this is a dirty needle. If you're going to relate it back to our exam, let's say it's a dirty needle. It's got bacteria on it. This has gone through a barrier of what? What is this? Yeah, this is going through the skin. So it's gone through the barrier. It's punctured down to lower layers. It's getting bacteria deep into the body. So sharp objects are like a big help for getting things deep into the body. I mean, that's kind of obvious, I guess, but so here we have a puncture wound. We've got bacteria in the body, and as this puncture happens, there is a third type of white blood cell called a mast cell. You have a lot of kinds of white blood cells. We've talked about 3 so far, 4 so far. Here's another one called mast cells. Mast cells mast cells are also white blood cells, and they wait below barriers to detect invaders. They wait below the barriers. So they wait below skin barriers. They also wait below mucous membranes. That's a good place for them to be. That makes sense with their second line of defense. So they're waiting for things to get past the first line, the barriers. They wait, and when they detect invaders, they release inflammatory chemicals. They release inflammatory chemicals out of these granules that they have in their cytoplasm. So they're just sitting there. It's like if you were a guard, you're a guard at the courthouse, and there are barriers and there's like metal detectors and stuff. And then if someone like barges in there and runs past, you're right there where you need to be. And it's like if you had not a gun but a bullhorn. Like that's the message, is these inflammatory chemicals. So these include things like histamine. We'll just stick with histamine right now. See these purple dots floating out of there? That's histamine inflammatory chemicals. And you may not have heard of histamine, but you've heard of antihistamine. Some of you may be taking them today, like with all the sniffling that's going on.
So I'm assuming that reduces inflation?
Inflammation.
Inflammation, yeah.
Yeah. Well, like inflation, like I'll come back to that. There is kind of some inflation going on as well. So here come the bacteria. Here you have second line of defense, mast cell, releasing chemicals. Yeah.
What are the barriers that they wait for?
It's almost any barrier. So under the skin, like in your nose, under the mucous membrane in your nose. So if you breathe in pollen and you're allergic to pollen, like some of us are right now, your mast cells have learned that pollen is really dangerous. It's not. We'll talk about that later. Like that's allergy. But when you have an allergy, it's like, oh, pollen, it's not dangerous, but like they're releasing this inflammatory chemical, and then you do an inflammation response to fight the not dangerous pollen.
And then you get like a runny nose?
Mm-hmm. For all the reasons that we're going to talk about next. So if you take an antihistamine, it reverses the effects of the, it's like shuts up the bullhorn.
So
Yeah.
basically the mast cells are released, and then
The mast cells wait. They don't actually move. They just wait there. When they detect that this is happening, they release the chemicals out of themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So do they exist where the dendritic cells?
They are usually above the dendritic.
So they're kind
Let me
of
think
the
about
first-
this.
Okay.
Okay, so here's skin. The dendritic cells are in the skin. They would be in here. This is not drawn to scale, by the way.
Oh, okay. I was like, that is
Absolutely not.
confusing.
Like, this is not to scale at all. I never thought about that, but you would have dendritic cells here. There to crawl around and deal with problems that are stuck in amongst the cells. Down here, we're now like in the tissue fluid. Yeah, good question. The dendritic cells are like, if they happen to be right there, they might be able to do something, but they can't leave their spot, and we're now down in fluids.
So it's there.
Yeah, so during inflammation, you have release of these inflammatory chemicals. And the inflammatory chemicals, like histamine, are going to do a set of processes. So, histamine, these inflammatory chemicals, it's going to cause vasodilation. Vasodilation, which means that capillaries, which are your smallest blood vessels, enlarge their diameter. The capillaries enlarge their diameter. So compare this picture with this picture. So here's a normal capillary. When they detect these chemicals, they widen their diameter and they get a little bit more leaky. So they enlarge their diameter and they get leaky. And that allows neutrophils, which are another white blood cell, to crawl out. So, I know this is a lot of stuff. All of this is actually protective for you. What'd you say?
I said that's going to be important because that is pretty much how sepsis works, doesn't it? It's the reason why we have like hypotension.
Sepsis would be bacteria coming in the cracks.
Yeah,
and
what I'm
growing
saying is
in the
like,
bloodstream.
what I'm saying is like whenever it like vasodilates because it leaks out
Mhm.
because they're responding so much to the infection. Is that how that kind of works?
Yeah, sepsis would be when you have bacteria in the bloodstream and every blood vessel all over your body is vasodilating. This would be a local thing.
Oh, okay.
This would be local in this spot. So if this, if it's happening right here, it's only right here. It's not every blood vessel in my whole body. It's supposed to just be local. Yeah, so here the blood, the capillary is leaky. We've got neutrophils coming out. So if mast cells sent the alarm, and other police came to the area because they heard it, that's what this is like. So more blood cells, more white blood cells are coming to this area to help. They're squeezing out of the capillary. You also get plasma. So these yellow poofs, this is blood plasma coming into the area too. You've got a lot of stuff leaking. So when this vasodilation happens, draw an arrow from this. So vasodilation causes all of these things to happen. You have more blood flow to the area. You have more white blood cells arriving in this area. You have plasma leaking out of your capillaries. Those are the main things that are going on here. All of those things. And I want to leave that list up and then relate those in a minute to how does this relate to what inflammation looks like on a person. It happens to be called vascular reactions, but this is what I want you to focus on. We've got white blood cells, we've got more blood generally come to the area, plasma's leaking out. There's a lot of commotion here right now.
What is plasma?
Plasma is the liquid part of your blood. This is hard to teach without an A&P2. Like Austin and Asley are in A&P2, and now all this stuff that I talked about before, it probably makes more sense, but like,
What do
yeah.
you mean like the liquid part of the blood? I thought all of it was liquid.
Like if you take blood, if you draw blood and you let it sit, it's got cells.
Okay.
The cells will settle out, and then there'll be liquid at the top. And the liquid part is plasma. But that's, that's a good question. Plasma's liquid, so it's easy to leak out through little capillary cracks, so to speak. Okay, so all this stuff is arriving at the location where we've got an attempted invasion. And so here's all the stuff that's accumulating. And what happens now is this is a fight. So you've got white blood cells. Macrophages will also come out. I should write that too. More white blood cells, including macrophages. They come out of the capillary and they start eating the bacteria, and it's kind of a mess, and this is when you get pus forming. So edema, I'm going to pull this up. Okay, so edema means that you have swelling. Well, yeah, you've got swelling because you've got all this fluid and more cells coming to this area. Yeah, you get swelling. Pus is dead pathogens plus white blood cells, dead or alive, plus fluid. All that together is pus, and it tends to look white because of the number of white blood cells that are in it. So if you get a cut or a puncture, and you notice a couple days later that it's swelled up, it's got pus, it's in the process of getting infected, the outcome of this battle will determine, are you going to get better or is this infection going to spread? But the process of fighting it comes from your inflammatory response.
Is that fluid, plasma?
Yeah. Like on here?
Yeah.
Yeah, everything in between the cells in this area is basically fluid. And you've got extra fluid coming out of the bloodstream as well. Yeah. So, you have a fight going on. You hope that your immune system wins it. This part is the cleanup. This is the cleanup. Like we see the blood vessel has healed itself and grown back together. We have way fewer bacteria. Here's the macrophages. They're bigger. They're coming in to do the final cleanup of everything. And depending on how big the wound was, we may also have to build scar tissue. This is the resolution part. That's the healing, so to speak. I want to go back to this part. So when this part is going on, and you have all of this stuff in the area, that leads to the signs of inflammation. That's silly, but I want to connect this to what are the signs of inflammation. Inflammation. And these are things that you can see from the outside or you can feel as the person that it's happening to. So this list you should memorize. Number 1, inflammation comes with redness. Number 2, it's characterized by swelling. Number 3, heat or hot to the touch at that area.
Itchy.
Itchy is not one of them. Maybe that's surprising.
Yeah, I get itchy. I thought we said that.
It's not always itchy. Like itchy can happen. Itchy tends to go with allergic response.
Like my bursa sac, I think that's what it's called. It slipped out or something, and then like my knee got really fat. This was when I was wrestling, and then like my leg was really itchy, like the whole time. And the trainer, I don't know if she knows what she's talking about, but she just said that it was from like that fluid like rubbing against everything else in there because it's all swollen, so that's probably why it feels itchy.
I mean, it could be activating the same receptors that tell you that it's itchy.
Yeah, see, she gave me it seemed like really simple, her answer. I didn't really do.
Simple answers can be correct. And like that's the thing too, when you talk to patients as a nurse, you have to decide like how much, what words do I want to use right now with them and what words do I not want to use with them? Because if you're just like, you know, if I'd said this to a patient, like your macrophages, blah, 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 and your mast cell, that's not helpful to them. That's not helpful to them. Okay, number 4 is pain. And number 5, you may lose function in the area. Loss of function. These 4 come directly from these events. So the events of what all is involved in this fight and what has come to this area, that leads to the signs of inflammation. Because you have more blood flow, that's the redness, that's the swelling, that's the heat, and the swelling itself, that pushes on your pain receptors. So you know from AMP1, you haven't covered this yet actually, but if you're in AMP1, you'll talk about nervous system. You have receptors for all these different things. You have pressure receptors that if they're hit hard enough, we think we feel it as pain.
Is that what? It's like tender?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's add that on here. Pain, tenderness. Yeah. I mean, those are kind of the same thing, depending on the person.
Yeah.
Some people say, yeah, it's kind of tender, and some people are like, ah.
It's
It's the same process. Yeah, because it's pushing. It's pushing on your receptors, and if you have a hard enough push, it feels like pain. So that's the blood, more blood flow to the area causes all these things. So your blood is warm. When you've got more of it in the area, it's going to feel hot to the touch. Your blood is fluid, so when you've got more of it in the area, you're going to get swelling. Swelling pushes on pain receptors. And your blood is red, so when you've got more blood to the area, you're going to get redness. All of these come from, all the signs of inflammation come from this. Yeah.
So those little notes to the right, and then the neutrophils leaving the blood and entering the tissue, that's the actual function of inflation?
Inflammation.
Inflammation, my fault. Inflammation. Yeah. And so then why it happens is the mast cells and the response and how they release the history.
Yeah, let's go back and look at big picture stuff for inflammatory response. So inflammatory response, I'm going to write some of what you just said on here in a big picture way. So inflammatory response, the purpose of it is to bring immune cells to an area of pathogen invasion. That's what it's for. Like, we need some immune cells in here to deal with this problem, to try to kill these bacteria. That's the purpose of it. Inflammatory response is initiated by chemicals from the mast cells. So the position of the mast cells is important. You don't need mast cells to be really deep in your body. You need them to be right under the barriers. So let's write that. They're initiated by chemicals from mast cells. And those mast cells are right underneath the physical barriers. So they're underneath the skin. They're underneath the mucous membranes. Right there, where they can send these signals and initiate the inflammatory response. That puts this into context. This, I know I've spent a lot of time on this, but like this relates to a lot of human health issues and problems, and
symptoms and treatments is having an inflammatory response. We're supposed to not have inflammatory responses unless this is really dangerous. If we're making an inflammatory response against not dangerous things, that's an allergy or that's an autoimmune disease. Monday, we'll stay on this slide set, but you should read whatever is announced for Monday, which is about antigens and antibodies. So I will see you then.